Okay, students, in this lecture, we are going to keep learning about the firm's capital structure decision. Remember that we are in our journey to know the relationship between the firm's capital structure and its value. Okay, to just recap where we are at, let me show you this summary slide. Okay, remember that we, in our search for the relationship between the capital structure and firm's value, we staggered our discussion step by step. So initially, we assumed the perfect world. If the world is perfect, recall that the firm's capital structure didn't affect the firm value. So whether the firm is levered or unlevered, the firm value is equal. In other words, the firm's value is not affected by its capital structure. Well, another way to put it was to say that the firm's overall cost of capital, which is summarized by its WACC, is constant, always constant at the RU level, which is the expected cost of capital for unlevered company, which is 100% equity finance. Well, remember that even in a perfect world, there were two things that do change with the leverage. The first one was risk of equity holders, and the second one was return to equity holders. Well, the risk to equity holders, whether it's perfect world or not, naturally increases due to the contracting nature. So remember that debt holders, they receive the promises in terms of their payment, but equity holders do not receive such promises. So the payment to debt holders have to be made first, and that's an obligation on firm's part. And after the debt holders are fully paid, if some cash is still left, equity holders can claim, have a claim on such cash. Therefore, when the company uses more debt, more cash will be used up to pay interest to debt holders, leaving less amount of cash left available for equity holders. Therefore, the risk of equity holders will increase with the use of more debt, and therefore, to compensate for higher risk, the return to equity holders should be increasing as well. And now, next we lifted one of the biggest perfect world assumptions, which was no tax assumption. So we introduced the taxes, and as soon as we introduced taxes into our model, our implications have quickly changed, right? So due to the discriminating treatment of taxes, discriminatory treatment of taxes on debt payment and equity payment, when we introduced taxes, we were quickly seeing that the capital structure will be biased toward more debt financing. Okay, so in the world with taxes, we had seen that the firm value is always larger when it's using debt as opposed to when it's not using debt. By how much? By the size of total future interest captial in present value term. And we had seen that this size can be summarized as corporate tax rate times permanent debt amount D with a permanent debt assumption. Another way to put this is, again, in terms of the WACC. So in the world with taxes, we had seen that the firm's overall cost of capital, WACC, is monotonically decreasing with the leverage. Okay, and by how much? By debt to value ratio times cost of debt capital times corporate tax rate. And also remember that even in the world with taxes, the risk and return to equity holders still do increase monotonically with the debt to equity ratio, but at a slower attenuated rates than before compared to in a perfect world due to the tax savings effect of interest payment. Okay, well, so what are the implications so far? In the perfect world, we had seen that capital structure is irrelevant. It didn't matter. The firm value won't be affected no matter what amount of debt the firm uses. And with the presence of taxes, we had seen that our implications had changed to the opposite direction. Now, capital structure matters so much to the point that the theory is pointing to the 100% maximum amount of debt uses. Both perfect world version theory and tax version theory cannot reconcile with the reality that we are dealing with and the actual practice that we observe in our real world. Okay, so in the next step, we are going to move on to make our model one step closer to the reality that we are living in. Okay, so now we are going to lift the second assumption of the perfect world, which is no bankruptcy cost assumption. So remember that we had lifted the no tax assumption. Together with that, now we are going to also lift the no bankruptcy or financial distress cost assumption. So now we are living in a world where both taxes and financial distress cost exist. Okay, so what are costs of bankruptcy and financial distress? Well, financial distress, first of all, occurs when promises to creditors, debt holders are broken or honored with difficulty. Remember from chapter 15, the most important feature of debt contracting is the presence of promises given to creditors. So when these promises are broken, the firm enters into financial distress, okay? And costs of financial distress mean all the costs that are arising from bankruptcy or from distorted business decisions on the brink of bankruptcy. In other words, costs of financial distress are all unnecessary deadweight costs that has to be incurred because of the fact that the firm's in or near bankruptcy. Well, let's give more thought on this cost of financial distress. Okay, so let me show you this slide. Somehow I cannot make it. Sorry about that. I cannot share it. Well, I will just read from here. Okay, so actually we can decompose the expected cost of financial distress into two components. First component is the probability of financial distress. Second component is actual cost of financial distress. Okay, what the perfect world is assuming is that the actual cost of financial distress is zero. Okay, so even in the perfect world, it does not necessarily mean that bankruptcy will never ever happen. Even in the perfect world, bankruptcy still can happen. But what the perfect world is assuming is that even when the bankruptcy happens, actual cost of financial distress will be zero. What does that mean? It means that, you know, when the bankruptcy happens, basically the contract with debt holders are broken, the company will have to renegotiate and renew the contracts. Then when the bankruptcy happens, equity holders understand that they have no claim within the company and they will just peacefully and happily leave the company. And junior debt holders, they understand that they are junior to senior debt holders. So they will understand that they will have to quietly wait until all the senior debt holders are fully satisfied, and they will be happy if something's still left for them, but if not, they will be just embracing the fact. How likely that is, you think? Well, very unlikely. Actually, in the bankruptcy court, you will see the ugly nature of human being. Okay, and everybody will be fighting in the bankruptcy court to receive more and to claim more and to take away more from the troubled company. So in reality, it's very unlikely that the actual cost of financial distress will be zero. So now by lifting the zero cost of financial distress assumption, we are assuming that the actual cost of financial distress will be positive. Well, even with that amount to be positive, we can still make the expected cost of financial distress zero. What is the way? Actually, the only way to keep the expected cost of financial distress zero with a positive cost of financial distress? Yes, the only way is to make the probability of financial distress zero. How do we achieve that? Yes, we can make the probabilities of financial distress zero by using no debt at all. So by definition, when the firm is all equity financed, 100% equity financed, the firm has no obligations to debt holders. Therefore, the probabilities of financial distress will be zero. Okay, but now the world we are considering right now, as the company increases the amount of debt, the probability of financial distress will also increase to a positive value. And now, combining the positive probability of financial distress happening and positive actual cost of financial distress, the expected cost of financial distress will be non-zero. It will be positive. This is what we are dealing with in this new model. Okay, so let's go back to our previous slide. Okay, so Ch.16, the cost of financial distress will be positive in this new model that we are considering now. And these expected cost of financial distress will be ultimately borne by shareholders because creditors foresee the cost and know that they will pay them if default occurs. For this, the creditors will demand higher interest rates in advance. And this will reduce the present market value of equity shares. Okay, and now let's give more thoughts on the size of bankruptcy cost. Okay, we can decompose the bankruptcy cost into two categories. One is direct cost, and second one is indirect cost. First of all, what are direct costs of bankruptcy? Direct costs of bankruptcy are all the legal and admin costs related to the bankruptcy procedures. You know, when the firm is in bankruptcy court, they will have to hire lawyers, they will have to hire accountants and trustees, and they will have to hire other very expensive professionals, and they will have to incur filing fees and court users fees, etc. All these costs add up to the direct cost of financial distress. Each country has a bankruptcy code designed to provide an orderly process for settling a firm's debt. However, even with the presence of such rules and codes, the bankruptcy process is still very complex, time-consuming, and costly. And oftentimes, when the firm is in financial distress, outside professionals, who are oftentimes very expensive, should be hired. The bottom line is that the direct cost of financial distress will be unlikely to be zero. Okay. Well, in the US, we have two basic forms of bankruptcy. Number one is what is called Chapter 7 process. Number two, it is what is called Chapter 11 process. I'm not going to go through all the details of Chapter 7 process and Chapter 11 process, but just know that Chapter 7 is used to liquidate the company. So when the involved parties believe the firm has no economic value, so it's better to be sold in piecemeal fashion and liquidated, people will use the Chapter 7 process. Instead, if the related party think the company still does have economic value, then Chapter 11 process will be used to make the company reorganize and let it live once again. Okay. So I'm not going to go through the details of each process, but again, the bottom line here is that whether it being Chapter 7 process or Chapter 11 process, it is very complicated and lengthy process, therefore it is very costly. And it's very unlikely that the actual cost of bankruptcy will be zero. Okay. The next natural question is, if it's positive, if it's non-zero, how big they are, okay? The relevance of the direct cost of financial distress, okay? So one of the major issues here is the relevance of bankruptcy costs. Are they big enough to be the major factor determining optimal capital structure? In other words, are the direct costs of bankruptcy big enough to be an offsetting factor to the tax benefits of using that? Okay, so people did a little bit of research, and most studies have a consensus. They typically report that the average actual direct costs of bankruptcy once bankruptcy happens are approximately 3 to 4% of the firm's value, okay, exposed. It means once bankruptcy happens, the company is likely to lose about 3 to 4% of its value due to the presence of direct costs of bankruptcy. And the probability of bankruptcy happening is about, on average, 5% in the US. So combining the actual cost of direct cost of bankruptcy once it happens, and the probability of bankruptcy happening, the ex-ante expected direct cost of bankruptcy is about only 0.1 or 0.2% of the firm value, multiplying 3 to 4% of firm value by 5% probabilities. Well, 0.1 to 0.2% of firm value, that is way too small compared to the size of tax benefits of using that. Researchers say that on average, the tax benefits of using that amounts to about 10 to 20% of firm value. So the direct cost of financial distress is about 0.1 to 0.2% of firm value, as opposed to tax savings effect is about 10% to 20% of firm value. So the conclusion here is that the expected direct cost of bankruptcy are way too small relative to the tax advantages of that to have any impact on capital structure decision. Then what do we do? Do we have to give up, and are we back to the 100% debt financing implications? Maybe not yet. It's way too early to give up, because there is at least one thing that we haven't considered yet, which is indirect cost of financial distress. So what are the indirect costs of financial distress? So indirect costs of financial distress, they are all unobservable opportunity cost that happens due to the fact that the firm is in or near bankruptcy. It includes loss of customers. You know, when you hear that the company is in or near bankruptcy, will you buy the products from the company when you have other alternatives from other companies? Probably not. So when the firm is in or near bankruptcy, you will see the sales decreases. And also when the firm is in or near bankruptcy, the suppliers may stop shipping inventories due to the fear of not receiving the money. So you will lose the supplies. And when the firm is in trouble, it will be very hard to hire quality employees. And when the firm is in bankruptcy, the company needs cash and liquidity very desperately. So the firm may have to buy or sell of its assets at deep discount price. Well, you know, and also managing a company is a very hard job to begin with. And if you have to do it when the firm is in bankruptcy, that's double hard, okay? So the managers and the management will lose efficiency of the management. And also, investors may be reluctant or refuse to provide any additional capital, or the company will have to pay very high cost to raise more capital. So all these add up to the unobservable opportunity cost, which is indirect cost of financial distress. Okay, the next question is the relevance of indirect costs, how big they are. Okay, by nature, inevitably, the indirect costs of financial distress are very hard to measure, setting aside defining it. Okay, well, but researchers came up with very different creative ideas to measure the size of indirect costs, and the consensus is that it's pretty substantial. Empirical estimates are about 10 to 20% of firm value. Okay, so, and more importantly, many of these indirect costs may be incurred even if the firm is not yet in financial distress, but simply face a significant possibility that it may occur in the future. So the conclusion here is that combining the direct cost of financial distress and indirect cost of financial distress, the magnitude is pretty similar to that of interest tax shield. Now, cost of financial distress have become a large enough and significant enough factor to be comparable to the size of tax shield. Okay, so now let's go back to our pizza analogy. Okay, so previously in a perfect world, we said that no matter how we carve up the whole pizza between debt holders and equity holders, combining the debt holder slice and equity holder slice, the whole size of the pizza remains the same. When we introduced the taxes, we have seen our implications have changed. So now the government will take one slice from the firm's pizza. And previously, with the presence of taxes, our goal was to maximize the combined size of debt holder slice and equity holder slice. That was relatively easily achievable because to achieve the goal of maximizing D plus E slices, we only needed to minimize the government slice, which was achievable by using more of that. Now, with the presence of both taxes and bankruptcy costs, we now see that two parties are taking slices from the firm's pizza. Okay, the government will take one slice, and also bankruptcy-related people will take another piece as well. Now, to achieve our goal to maximize the combined size of debt holder slice and equity holder slice, we have to minimize the combined size of B and G slices. And this is not anymore as easy as before, okay? Which leads us to the next discussion, which is optimal capital structure theory.